Often when studying the industrial age, one can become too enamored with its impact on urbanization and the massive wealth that accumulated in the hands of the few. However, agriculture also felt its influence, with many small family-run farms merging and transitioning into behemoth mechanized estates. During the late 19th century, many farmers began to recognize the high prices of certain crops and proceeded to specialize in one specifically, a phenomenon known as growing cash crops. This subsequently led to a desire for increased production, which the Industrial Revolution conveniently handed to them. Before mechanization, farming was mostly back-breaking manual labor, where employing, or perhaps making, more workers or purchasing more beasts of burden was the only way to increase production. Even advancements in machinery before this era required manpower or animal power to function, such as the steel plow or the McCormick reaper. Now came the steam engine, which pulled combines, or combined threshers and reapers, to increase production manyfold. This production didn't always lead to increased profits, however, as farmers often made poor business decisions. Mismanagement was rampant, and farmers tended to blame their financial troubles not on themselves, but the railroads and corporations. Small farmers were also forced out of agriculture to make room for the enormous fields of the mechanized farms. This, of course, only increased urbanization, as these farmers were forced to look for jobs in factories. An excellent example of this was seen in California, where farms were 3 times the size of the national average because of land grants and railroad and land taken from the Mexicans who lived there. All of this led to the huge acreage and sophisticated technology that characterize farms today.
Settlers can come from all different places, including areas such as Australia, Canada.
How you doing, eh, horsey? Let's giddy up, eh? You know, I'm part of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, otherwise known as the Mounties, eh? You ride horses and we're police, eh? Hey!
And even Russia.
Hello, comrade.
Hello.
How are you today?
Good. Are you heading to Siberia?
Yes, I am. That's Lasagna.
Oh, good luck.
Yeah.
The reasoning behind people migrating is different depending on circumstance and needs, but most of the time, it usually involves the want of land or other enticing characteristics to certain areas, such as the promise of gold in California. In this process of migration, native people were increasingly being kicked off their own lands, ones that they had been on long before the migrants moved through the areas, in favor of these new migrants with superior firepower and transportation.
You didn't reckon get off my land.
No, this is my homeland.
The American frontier soon became famously known as its land was previously thought of as uninhabitable, and the journey on paths such as the Oregon Trail were difficult and brought lots of death and disease. In many places, people wanted land so badly that instead of just forcing natives off the land, they would kill them as to have no opposition to the process of migration.
You didn't reckon get off my land.
No, this is my homeland.
Russia and Argentina both experienced this type of violence, only to have the new land be occupied by poor farmers. The problems this created were immense, as the natives were opposed to being moved off the land in the first place, but now that they were moved, the government had to try to figure out new areas to relocate them to without disturbing future migration.
In the 1880s and 1890s, farmers had what some might call the opposite of a golden age. New machines were increasing production rates, but more produce means the prices for crops fell. On top of that, the production of America was increasing, but the money supply in America was not increasing, So money was being deflated, and farmers did not want that. Deflation made it harder for farmers to pay off their debts because money was worth more at this time. So you have low prices for the crops, and you have deflation on top of that. So farmers in this time kept getting more and more into debt until they cannot support their own farm. And they had to join large farms, which led to an increase in tenant farming.
The farming industry in America was doing just fine when a massive blow stabbed it right in the face. That massive blow came in the form of bad yields due to a variety of natural causes. Droughts stole away much-needed irrigation from crops, floods hastened erosion by washing away once fertile topsoil, and pests, such as grasshoppers, ate whatever was left.
Why is this tree being such a virgin?
Well, it's these critters been eating all our corn.
What do you mean?
Well, these insects, they just come and they just eat all the crop.
Gosh darn.
They've been a drought too. We can't get any water.
Man, this ain't good at all.
Yeah.
These conditions left farmers with little yield, ultimately resulting in the emigration of farmers from the Great Plains region, forcing them elsewhere.
It's about 20 pounds of corn.
And it's good harvest this year.
Whew. How's the wife been?
Oh, pretty good, pretty good.
Yeah, that's good. Kids? Oh, only got 70.
In addition to their troubles, the local, state, and federal government squeezed them dry with excessive taxes, siphoning money out of the West and into the pockets of wealthy Easterners. This left the farmers no choice but to sell their goods at a lower price in a competitive market because everyone had to mark down their prices. Furthermore, middlemen charged exorbitant prices.
How much does it cost to ship 20 pounds of corn?
$50 a pound for whatever you got.
How much is that?
Well, with 20 pounds of corn,
Yeah.
$50 a pound.
Yeah.
According to Dr. Barrington,
Yeah.
that's you can sell $2 a bushel,
Yeah.
5 bushels a pound.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
That's
what
like
is that?
$1,000.
That's way too much.
Way too much.
For example, the railroad operators, in order to gain maximum profits, would charge farmers so high that at times it was more profitable to sell the corn as fuel than attempt to ship it to a market.
We can sell this corn.
Yeah, we might as well just burn it for fuel. That's what the Granger farmers are doing.
Yeah, I guess.
Why farm when you can farm off of farmers who don't even farm?
Hi there, my name is Dr. Brad Love from the University of Economic Theory. Today, I'm going to be talking about farmers in the late 1800s. So, farmers around this time period were not doing so hot. Prices had sagged in 1868, and many farmers tried to save themselves from high indebtedness and low prices by asking for inflation through paper money. This led to the organization of the National Grange of the Patrons.
But it will be better known as the Grange.
Hey Billy, I heard you're a shrewd and energetic Minnesota farmer, now working as a clerk in Washington.
I am going to enhance the lives of isolated farmers through social, educational, and fraternal activities.
These concerts, picnics, and lectures are good because I was cursed with loneliness.
Kelly struck a chord with these farmers, and the Grange spread like Ebola in Africa, quickly gaining near 800,000 members. Grangers started to change their views as well. They began to move away from the idea of individual self-improvement and started to accept the idea of the enhancement of the collective group of farmers. Grangers also began to find a voice in politics. Their goals were to regulate railway rates and to regulate the storage fees of railroads. They drew up Grange laws, which didn't always work. The laws had to go through a lot of high courts and well-paid lawyers. In the case of the Wabash decision, which said that individual states could not regulate interstate commerce, their influence slowly disappeared. The Greenback Labor Party was another way for farmers to express their grievances. In 1878, they even elected 14 members of Congress. In the presidential election of 1880, they nominated General James B. Weaver, who was an old Granger. He had a strong voice, but he didn't do so well in the eventual election. Whoa! Farmers stood up and fought for their rights. And what'd they get from it? Well, politically speaking, not that much. However, farmers as a whole became just that, whole. They were no longer isolated and acting as one individual unit. They came together and worked for their rights and acted as one united team.